I crossed the road hurriedly, excited at the prospect of my inheritance. Dodging the horse-drawn carriages, I hopped onto the pavement with glances from the well-to-do pedestrians of this area of London. I'd spent my day at the offices of the Executor, ensuring that all legalities were in order before receiving the key to my new home. As unkind as this may sound, my uncle's death could not have occurred at a more appropriate time for me. I barely knew him. I'd not seen him since I was a small child, but I was his sole heir. With my own financial issues threatening homelessness, to receive this extravagant townhouse within the confines of a wealthy neighbourhood was a boon beyond my expectation. 3 floors greeted me as I grasped the key in my hand. The clop of horse hooves rang in my ears, along with the hiss of the gas street lamps igniting to ward off the growing dusk. I counted 15 low steps from the pavement to the shiny black front door, and I took each step, unable to suppress the smile on my face. I counted their number. Stepping on the 12th, I skipped the next one and leapt up to the 14th. Unlocking the door, it opened with a clunk, and I entered into the hallway, shutting out the world beyond. I dropped my brown suitcase containing all my possessions and placed my hands on my hips. Not only had I inherited the house, it also came fully furnished, with tastefully decorated fixtures and fittings, red velvet cushioned furniture, and various landscape paintings adorning the wood-panelled walls. I lit the candles plugged into the candelabra on the hallway table, casting their glow across the room. Picking up the candelabra, I began to explore, opening doors and going through the parlour and into the dining room, the flickering light casting shadows around the solid mahogany furniture and reflecting from the leaded windows hung with plush drapes. Entering the kitchen, the walls hung with the brass pots and pans and a large white sink embedded within a hardwood worktop. The scullery beyond led to a rear garden, and the glance through the window displayed overgrown brambles and ivy that would need work to clear. To my consternation, the final room on the ground floor lay locked. I tried the handle a few times, pushing to see if it was merely stuck, but a small keyhole indicated that it stood bolted. Just off the hallway lay the staircase to the first floor. Once again, I skipped the 13th step. A large bathroom lay at the top, replete with a porcelain bath on legs and an indoor lavatory. Being used to the outdoor privies from my northern abodes, this felt like the height of luxury. Several bedrooms lay off this, and I selected the largest one, replete with a curtained 4-poster bed for my own. Being the largest of them, I surmised this had been my uncle's room. At the very end of the landing stood another door, and once again this was locked. With everywhere else located, I worked out that this would be the doorway that led to the staircase up to the attic room at the top of the house. The yellow gaslight filtering through the windows indicated the late hour, and following my initial excitement, tiredness crept over me. I retrieved my suitcase before retiring to my new bedroom and changing into my nightshirt. Closing the curtains around my bed, I settled into the deep, warm mattress, resting my head on the eider-down pillow. Before sleep took me, I reflected on the course of events that led me to this place. I recalled my father's death on Friday the 13th of October, 2 years ago. My mother died in childbirth, and so this left me an orphan. My father had debts, and so these were recovered from his inheritance, leaving not a penny for me. Seeking employment, I left my home in the north and travelled to London, aware that my father's brother lived here, in some luxury by all accounts. I hope that I may encounter him during my stay in the capital. I had no inkling of where he lived, and he had not attended the funeral, so I had no contact with him. From my father's tales before his death, I knew my uncle lived a solitary life, and spent much of his time travelling to various parts of the world. The 2 brothers were estranged, and when I queried my father for the reason, he replied vaguely, stating my uncle's strange and rather extravagant lifestyle, He questioned his morals and hinted his belief that his brother studied ungodly beliefs and practiced occult rituals. My father, on the other hand, remained devout to the grave. He warned me about the number 13, being the number of guests at the Last Supper, and he passed his fear on to me. I began to associate every dire event to that most unlucky of numbers. I would leave the room if 13 people were present. I would give away a penny if I found I had 13 in my pocket, and I always avoided the 13th step. My unease wholly solidified when my father passed away on that most disturbing of days. I could not help but feel destined that 13 would lead to my downfall if I allowed it. So at every opportunity, I avoided this number in all its manifestations. And when I received a letter from my uncle's executor, who tracked me down from parish records, informing me of my inheritance, my belief stated that goodness came from this numerical avoidance. At some point in my contemplations, sleep overcame me, and I drifted into some dream I cannot recall. A sudden noise woke me from my slumber, a banging at regular intervals, and it appeared to be sounding from the ceiling above my head. As is my habit, I counted the thudding. 12, and then they ceased. My pocket watch lay on the bedside table, and I picked it up, reading its face through the moonlight filtering through the curtains. It was midnight. I lay awake for a few moments listening, but silence only greeted me. Possibly mice, I thought, or perhaps a pigeon trapped in the loft, and I drifted back to sleep. After a breakfast of porridge and tea, a knock at the door startled me from taking inventory of the household items. Opening the door, I recognized Mr. Wilkins, the executor of the will, wearing his full suit and top hat. I invited him in, and he removed his hat, placing it on the stand alongside his cane. Tea remained in the pot, and I offered him a cup in the dining room as the morning sunshine shone brightly through the windows. "Forgive my intrusion," began Mr. Wilkins, "but after you left yesterday, I remembered a couple of final matters that I should bring to your attention." I looked at him in query, raising my eyebrows. "Firstly," he went on, "I need to add your name to the deed on the house." Producing a pen and inkpot from his bag, he dipped the nib and wrote my name on the parchment in ornate calligraphy, before lifting the paper and blowing on it to dry. He then scrolled it back up, tied it with the ribbon, and handed it to me. "That done," said Mr. Wilkins, "I also have this key. Not sure what it opens. Your uncle didn't specify." Reaching into his jacket pocket, he produced a key and placed it on the table. "Thanks," I replied. I noticed a couple of locked doors. Mr. Wilkins finished his tea and began to wish me good day, his obligation completed. "Before you go," I asked, somewhat sheepishly, "I never discovered how my uncle died. He seemed a relatively young man, just approaching middle age. I wonder that's his cause of death." Mr. Wilkins hesitated before replying, giving me a glance that sent something of a shudder down my spine. He seemed to be debating with himself about how much to reveal. "The doctor stated he died of angina pectoris," said Mr. Wilkins. "I have little knowledge of medicine, but knew this was a condition related to the functioning of the heart." "I see," I replied, following the executor as we went through to the hallway. "Did he die in the house?" "Indeed," he said. "By all accounts, he was found in this very hallway, grasping the key I've just handed over." "Really?" I said. "I wonder what he was doing when he died." I handed Mr. Wilkins his hat and cane, and then opened the front door for him. As he departed, he turned and spoke to me for a final time. I heard from the attending doctor that his face was fixed in a mask of fear. He surmised caused by the anguish from his chest pains, but the doctor seemed very disturbed by his cadaver's countenance. "I say it not to worry you, but you seem curious about your uncle, so I am obliged to honesty. My thanks to you, Mr. Wilkins, I say, closing the door behind him. As I am left alone, I stare down at the marble floor below my feet, wondering about my uncle's final moments. Remembering the key, I rushed up the stairs, stepping over the number 13, to the door leading up to the attic. I tried the key, but no success. The lock did not budge. Frowning, I returned to the hallway and made my way through to the other locked room. Success. The key opened the door. Inside, I found my uncle's study. Bookshelves lined the wall, and in the centre sat a large wooden desk, ornately carved with figures of feminine beauty, resembling the pantheon of gods and goddesses of the subcontinent. I sat in a comfortable chair and looked around the room. An empty hearth lay ready for me to light, and the shutters lay closed, casting diffuse light in striped motes. I considered my uncle's final moments. He must have been in here, and then departed as his pain intensified, locking this room behind him. Something of value must lie in this study, if he saw need to secure it. I began to search through the desk drawers, and opening the first, I encountered a leather-bound journal. It smelled of burnt wood, and the binding cracked as I opened it. Inside, pages of writing, written by a scribbling hand, almost illegible. It appeared my uncle had maintained a record of his life. I flicked through the pages and resolved to read it more thoroughly over the coming days to discover more about my predecessor. As I dropped it into the pocket of my jacket, I removed the scroll for the deed on the house. The desk drawer will be a good place to keep it. Before I put it away, I untied the ribbon and unfurled it, using the desk paperweights and ink jar to keep it flat. I spotted my name, freshly written at the bottom of the list, along with my uncle's just above it. I did not recognize the names of the others before him, but as I counted their number, to my dismay, I discovered that I was the 13th owner of this property. A shiver passed down my spine. How unfortunate. I'd spent my life avoiding this cursed number, but now found myself with the dilemma of being the 13th custodian of this house. Later, as the evening descended, I lit the oil lantern and turned up the flame so I could read the journal. I was both fascinated and horrified at the revelations of his life. My uncle, it appeared, held a lifelong desire to find out as much as he could about the afterlife and what occurs to our mortal souls upon our passing. He detailed such events as seances and tarot card readings. At one such event, a medium contacted the spirit world, and my uncle witnessed the very essence of ether emerging from her mouth like a ghastly mist. At another, he heard the deep booming voice of a deceased man, despite the medium being a fragile young woman who could in no way possess such speech. It left me very unnerved, and as I went to bed, I left the journal on the table so I could pick it up the next day once the daylight returned. But once again that night, as midnight struck, I heard the noises. Exactly 12 knocking sounds coming through the ceiling above me. They woke me with a start, and I clung to the bedsheet, my pupils wide in the darkness. I still felt perturbed by what I had read in the journal. As I began to settle, a new fear overcame me. I wasn't alone. The curtain surrounding my bed prevented me from seeing beyond and into my room, but I peered through the gap and saw my bedroom door lay open. In the darkness beyond, I saw a deeper darkness, vaguely shaped like a man. It just stood in the doorway. I could not make out any features, but shook as it seemingly beheld me. I almost cried out when the figure appeared to lift an arm, pointing at me. Then it turned and began to drift down the corridor. Hurriedly, I jumped out of bed and lit the candle sat on my table. In the flickering light, I passed my open door and into the landing beyond. In the gloom, I saw the figure approach the door to the loft, and then it vanished through it, passing through the closed door. I padded down the corridor and reached the locked door. I pressed my hand on it, and it didn't move. It was still locked. The house lay silent, not even a creak, and I returned to my bed as my growing dread enveloped me. The night passed restlessly, but when I awoke in the morning, I wondered whether I'd been prey to bad dreams. I wondered whether the journal played into my subconscious, although the repeated knocking from the attic required investigation. Frustrated at the locked door, I attempted to force it. Placing my hand on the handle, I pressed my shoulder to the wood and pushed. It did not budge. Trying more forcefully, I ended up bruising my bicep against the immovable barrier. Pondering my next move, I descended back into the study, taking my uncle's journal with me. The day arrived chilly, and so I fetched a bucket of coal I had found in the scullery to light the hearth. Not knowing when the fireplace was last used, I knew from my experience that one must ensure the chimney was clear before lighting the fire. A room filling with coal smoke, the furniture being covered in soot, was not something I relished. Glancing up the brick vent, I could feel a draft on my face, although I noticed a little charring around the damper. Next to the hearth lay a stand containing pokers and brushes, one of which I took up and began to sweep the loose detritus. Coughing as I inhaled the soot cloud, I heard a metallic tang in the hearth. Taking a poker, I fished through the ashes and saw a brass gleam. Reaching inside, I picked up another key, but this one sat on a ring with a further, smaller key attached. I had no doubt that this was the attic key I'd been searching for. Now I'd be able to find out what was going on up there, and whether I needed to call a rat catcher to clear any vermin. I had no clue to the nature of the smaller key, however. Sure enough, the large fitted the attic door and clicked open to reveal a narrow staircase with steep steps leading up to the attic room. I mounted the stairs as they curved up to the top floor, my thighs complaining a little, and I opened the attic door at the landing. A mere 10 steps, no need to avoid the 13th. The sight beyond filled me with surprise, although from reading my uncle's journal, I should not have been. A large space occupied the entire floor. On the far side, arched windows gave a view of the street, and the London skyline filled with smoking chimneys. The room itself lay full of furniture, stacked high with objects and devices that I could not fathom. Cabinets lined the walls, many glass-fronted and filled with all manner of bottles and potions. Looking through these, some were filled with the remains of grotesque creatures, small rodents and mammals, preserved in alcohol. Others were what I would only describe as embryonic, vaguely bipedal shapes in various stages of early development. Several tables also sat across the hardwood flooring. Most were circular, with chairs around them, and oil lamps at their centre. I wondered if he conducted seances upon them. I confirmed my suspicion when I spotted a 5-pointed star painted onto the floor, with unlit candles sat at their points, their melted wax hardened on the wood. Sifting through the various chests, I found papers detailing anatomy, along with many I could guess were to do with witchcraft, detailing certain energy points on a body that related to soul manipulation. In one container, I found a board with printed letters and yes-no answers. I'd heard tell of this practice of communing with the dead. Ouija, I believed it was named. So many strange objects, from exotic and mystical places I could scarcely imagine, sat in every corner of the attic. I felt unnerved at such a hold, but also a sense of curiosity. My uncle clearly had dealings with dark forces, but what, if anything, had he discovered? I took his journal and spent the rest of the day reading it in the parlour amongst the warm crackle of the hearth. I spent hours lost in his writing, as he wrote in great detail about his desire to commune with the dead, to reach out beyond this mortal plane and find answers to what lay beyond. He researched summoning techniques and travelled far and wide to obtain relics associated with spiritual examination. As I neared the end of his journal, the light began to fade outside as the yellow street lamps flared in the fog. I lit the candelabra sat on my side table and read the last few pages detailing his most recent exploits. He spoke of travelling to Eastern Europe by boat, passing through the Bosphorus to the dark ports beyond. Here he located a clock, which he described in great detail. Recalling my earlier search in the attic, I knew where it sat amongst the other items. Curiosity drove me, and I laid down the journal, leaving the final pages unread. Taking the candelabra, I returned to the attic, banishing the shadows with the glow. Sure enough, I found the clock my uncle referred to. It lay against the interior brick wall, standing tall and narrow, a grandfather clock to all intents, but with decorations such I'd never seen. The case appeared to be made of black ebony, and the carvings appeared to be tower-shaped, flanking the clock face. The face itself seemed to hold a glow in the light of my candles, dull brass with ornate hands. Opening the door below the face, the brass pendulum hung still. I nudged it, but it returned to its original spot, stubbornly unswaying. The clock displayed the time as midnight, both hands fixed in the north position. It did not tick or whir. Realization struck me as I spotted a small metal knot protruding from the face. Removing the attic key from my pocket, the other smaller key on the ring fitted the knot perfectly. It was the key to wind the clock. I twisted the key several times, hearing the click of the interior mechanism. After a few turns, I removed the key and attempted to move the hands to display the correct time. They wouldn't budge. I tried the pendulum again, but it remained still. Frustrated, I frowned and turned to leave. Then, I noticed that where I had turned the key, another, smaller hand sat. I'd surmised that it detailed the seconds between the minutes, but I was mistaken. Just a single hand pointed upwards, towards a Roman numeral, an X preceding 3 eyes. 13. What manner of clock was this? I felt the familiar shudder. This number occurred too often for my liking in this house. A sense of foreboding overcame me, and I left the attic room and returned to the parlour. I'd almost finished my uncle's journal, so I picked up the book and continued to read. The pages left me more disturbed than anything I had yet encountered. The final entry detailed how my uncle returned to London with the clock and found a place for it in his attic. By his account, the clock was a vessel to contain restless spirits willing to commune with the living. Believing this would finally answer the questions of the eternal, he conducted séance rituals in the attic in order to summon the deceased to entrap with its ebony construction. He spoke of the dead, angry at being disturbed and then caught within the trap. Wailing ghosts, terrified at the shattering of their eternal quiet, to become the thrall of an evil timepiece. Figuring that these spirits were the previous owners of the house, he continued until every one had been ordered out of the netherworld and imprisoned in the clock. Then, as he followed the law surrounding this clock, he wound it. Nothing happened. I read several pages where he vented his frustration. He had performed every heinous act to the letter, and yet the clock remained still and silent. Then I came to the final page. 5 words, scrawled across the paper, in large, jagged writing, a hurried gesture of a dying man. Do not wind the clock. That was it. A cold chill went through me that the crackling fireplace could not abate. I had wound the clock. I placed the journal down and attempted to reassure myself that I had not summoned any spirits. The clock remained inoperative for me. Regardless, I took the cap off the decanter and poured myself a large brandy. My nerves steadied a little. I retired for the evening. Once in my bed, I found sleep elusive. I lay awake, eyes wide open, reacting to every minor sound, every creak of the floorboard, every whisper of wind on the window. And then, as midnight arrived, 12 knocks emerged through the ceiling. Peering through my bed curtains once again, the figure of my uncle stood in the deeper darkness. Was this to be my future now, enduring nightly hauntings from those trapped within? Perhaps they were knocking for help. Maybe I could release them from their imprisonment. I had wound the clock again. Could this be the way to release the spirits from their torment? My uncle raised an arm, pointing at the stairway to the attic before drifting off. This man had been my blood relation. Despite the dark life he had led, was he now showing me the way to release those he summoned? I took the candelabra and followed him down the corridor. I had left the attic door open and the shape passed into it. I remained a few steps behind it, in the candle glow, and took the steps to the attic. I heard the sound of my own heartbeat. As I entered, the oil lamps flared into life. This alone almost made me run, but a combination of determination and curiosity overcame my fear. As I took further steps towards the clock against the far wall, I spotted that the pentagram on the floor glowed faintly, the candles at each point ignited. As I padded past the table, a deck of tarot cards stood face down. I had left them on the table earlier as I explored the room. I'm not sure what possessed me to do so, perhaps the reassurance of normality, but I mixed the pile up into a bunch of cards across the table. I then selected one at random. Card number 13. Death. I should have listened to the warning in the journal. I should have fled while I had the chance. But now, as I stood rigid with fright, I looked upon the terrible clock directly ahead. On either side of me, a mist began to fall, a corridor. The ether began to form, moving and drifting together to form distinct figures, 6 on my right and 6 on my left. I was the 13th. The clock came into life. The small dial with the number 13 began to spin. The pendulum swung violently, and a brass chime emerged from the face. I began to count. The apparitions came more into focus, and I noticed the features of my uncle on my right. His eyes held malice and something else. Triumph. The chimes continued. 10, 11, 12. Finally, with a boom, it chimed 13. Trapped out of time, the ghosts cried as banshees, forced to obey the evil nature of the clock. I felt myself dragged by their irresistible limbs towards it. I tried to move away, tried to flee, but I could feel my heart bursting through my chest. The room disappeared, leaving the 12 to pull me along to my final destination, all the time my mortal body straining and bulging. I cried out, a desperate attempt to plead mercy. I watched as the doctor found my body. I'd lain in the attic for days before Mr. Wilkins returned out of courtesy and found my remains. I lay in a frozen state of agony, eyes open, terror etched into my expression. The doctor arrived and shook his head. The heart condition must run in the family, he surmised, before taking my body away. I had no heirs. The house would go on the market, and we would remain here, we custodians. Eternally, I would remain the 13th.